I was only 14 years old when my mother looked me straight in the eyes and quietly said, "Pack your things. You can't stay here anymore." At first, I thought she was joking. I actually laughed, but no one else did. My father stood silently by the front door with his arms crossed, refusing to look at me. My younger brother wouldn't even meet my eyes. The house I'd called home my entire life suddenly felt cold, unfamiliar, like I had never belonged there in the first place. My hands started shaking. "Mom, where am I supposed to go?" She sighed impatiently, as if I'd asked the most annoying question in the world. "You'll figure it out, you always do." Those were the last kind words, if you could even call them kind, that I ever heard from her. I stuffed a few clothes into my old-school backpack while trying not to cry. Every shirt I folded reminded me of birthdays we'd celebrated together, Christmas mornings, movie nights. I kept waiting for someone to stop me. For my dad to say, "That's enough. She's our daughter." For my mom to hug me and say it was all a terrible mistake, but no one moved. No one spoke. When I stepped outside, the front door closed behind me. Then I heard it. The sound I'll never forget. Click, the door locked. I stood there for almost 20 minutes, hoping someone would open it again. Nobody ever did. That night, I slept on a park bench only 3 miles from the house where I'd grown up. I wasn't cold because of the weather. I was cold because I couldn't understand how two people who once promised to protect me could decide I wasn't worth keeping. I cried until there were no tears left. Then I made myself one promise. If I survive this, I'll never beg anyone to love me again. The next few months felt like surviving one storm after another. Some nights I stayed at youth shelters. Other nights I slept anywhere I could feel remotely safe. School became almost impossible. I stopped raising my hand in class, stopped laughing, stopped believing anyone noticed I existed. Teachers asked if everything was okay. I smiled. Friends asked why I never invited them over anymore. I lied, because admitting the truth felt more painful than carrying it alone. But life has a strange way of placing angels where you least expect them. One afternoon after school, my English teacher, Mrs. Carter, asked me to stay behind. She looked at my worn-out shoes, my empty backpack, and the dark circles under my eyes. Then she asked one simple question. "Emily, are you safe?" For weeks I'd told everyone I was fine. But for some reason, the moment she asked, I broke. I couldn't stop crying. Everything came pouring out. The nights alone, the hunger, the fear, the loneliness. She didn't interrupt me once. When I finally finished speaking, she quietly handed me a box of tissues. Then she smiled. "You're not alone anymore." I didn't know it then, but that conversation would become the first step toward rebuilding a life I thought had already ended. And 16 years later, the people who abandoned me would be standing on my front porch, begging me to open the very door they once slammed in my face. For the first time in months, I felt like someone actually saw me. Mrs. Carter didn't just listen to my story, she acted. Within a week, she connected me with a youth support program that helped teenagers who had nowhere else to go. It wasn't perfect. The room was tiny. The bed creaked every time I moved, and dinner was usually something that came out of a can. But to me, it felt like a palace. Because for the first time since my parents threw me away, I felt safe. Life slowly became less about surviving and more about rebuilding. I worked every job I could find, cleaning tables, stocking grocery shelves, walking dogs, anything that paid enough to buy food and school supplies. Some nights, I would finish my homework under the dim lights of a laundromat because I couldn't afford internet. I was exhausted. But every morning, I reminded myself of the promise I'd made on that park bench. No one will ever decide my worth again. At 16, I earned my first academic scholarship. Not because I was the smartest student, but because I refused to quit. When they called my name during the school assembly, everyone clapped. Everyone, except the two people I had secretly hoped would somehow hear about it. My parents. For a brief moment, I wondered if they were proud. Then I realized something. People who choose to walk away don't get to celebrate the finish line. College wasn't easy either. I attended classes during the day, worked evenings, and studied until 2 in the morning. There were nights I cried from exhaustion, not because I wanted to give up, but because I was terrified of failing. Failure meant proving my parents right, and I refused to give them that satisfaction. One afternoon, during my final year, my professor stopped me after class. "Emily," he said, "have you ever thought about applying to Blackwood Consulting?" I laughed. That company hired the best graduates in the country, people with connections, money, families that opened doors, not girls who once slept on park benches. I don't think I'd stand a chance. He smiled. Sometimes the people who survive the hardest storms become the strongest leaders. Those words stayed with me. So I applied. 3 interviews later, my phone rang. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. "Hello?" The woman on the other end said the sentence that changed my life forever. "Emily Carter, we'd like to offer you the position." I couldn't speak. I just stood there, crying, not because I had finally found success, but because 14-year-old Emily, the little girl standing outside that locked front door, would finally have a future. The years passed faster than I ever imagined. One promotion became another. I learned. I failed. I improved. Eventually, I became the youngest regional director the company had ever promoted. For the first time in my life, I bought a home. Not a mansion, not a palace, just a quiet white house with a small front porch. But when I unlocked that front door, something unexpected happened. I froze. Because I remembered another door, the one that had been locked behind me 16 years earlier. I stood there in silence. Then I whispered, "We made it." Not to anyone else. To the frightened 14-year-old girl who had never stopped living inside me, I believed the past was finally behind me. Until one rainy Saturday morning, someone knocked on my front door. 3 slow knocks. I looked through the security camera. My heart stopped. Standing on my porch, older, gray-haired, and looking nothing like I remembered, were my mother and my father. The same people who had thrown me out. The same people who never called, never searched for me, never apologized. After 16 years, they were back, and this time they wanted something. I stared at the screen, unable to move. 16 years. Not a single birthday card, not one phone call, not one apology. And now they were standing at my front door. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home, but something inside me whispered, "It's time." I opened the door. Neither of them smiled. My father looked older than I remembered. His shoulders were slumped. The confidence he once carried had completely disappeared. My mother's eyes filled with tears the moment she saw me. "Emily." Her voice trembled. "You look beautiful." I felt nothing. No anger, no joy, just silence. "What do you want?" They looked at each other. Finally, my father spoke. "We've made mistakes." Mistakes? That word echoed in my head. Throwing your 14-year-old daughter onto the street wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. I folded my arms. I'm listening. My mother wiped her eyes. "A few years ago, your father lost his business. We sold the house. Then the medical bills started. We've been struggling ever since." She hesitated. "We heard you've done very well." There it was, the real reason they had come. Not because they missed me, not because they loved me, because they needed me. I took a slow breath. Then I asked the question I'd waited 16 years to ask. "Why did you throw me away?" Neither of them answered. My father looked at the ground. My mother whispered, "We thought you were too difficult. You reminded us of problems we didn't know how to solve." "I know that doesn't excuse anything." "No," I replied quietly. "It doesn't." The silence between us felt endless. Finally, my father looked up. "We're asking for another chance. We don't expect forgiveness, but we hoped." He couldn't finish the sentence. I looked past them, at the rain falling onto my front porch, and suddenly I wasn't looking at two broken old people. I was looking at the little girl standing outside a locked door, begging to come home. I realized something. Holding on to hatred had never made me stronger. Surviving had. I walked inside. They didn't follow me. A few seconds later, I returned with a small envelope. Inside was enough money to help them pay for immediate expenses. I handed it to my father. His hands shook. "You'll help us?" "I'll help you, because that's who I am." I looked directly into his eyes. "But this doesn't erase what happened. You lost the right to be my parents the day you stopped protecting me." Tears rolled down my mother's face. "I'm so sorry." "I know," I said softly, "but some doors only close once." I stepped back. "I truly hope your lives get better, and I hope one day you forgive yourselves." Then I gently closed the door. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with peace. As I stood in my hallway, I realized something I had spent 16 years searching for. Closure doesn't come from making someone suffer. It comes from refusing to let their choices define your future. That frightened 14-year-old girl who believed she wasn't worth loving was finally gone. In her place stood a woman who had built her own family, her own home, and her own life. Sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't making people regret losing you. It's becoming someone who no longer needs their approval. So if you're listening to my story today, and someone has made you feel unwanted, please remember this. Your beginning does not decide your ending. The people who walk away from you do not get to decide your value. Keep going. Keep believing. One day you'll build a life so full of peace that the people who broke your heart will become just another chapter in your story. I'm Emily, and this was my story. Thank you for listening. If this story touched your heart, let me know in the comments. What would you have done if you were standing behind that door?